I've had mixed results with growing crops of early carrots over the years, and have probably had overall better success with batches of larger main crop carrots that I grow for storage. This season I sowed batches of early carrots in 4 of the outside gardens that I manage. I sowed 2 batches in the smaller and older polytunnel garden, as well as 1 batch in the larger polytunnel of the black plot. These 7 batches were sown in different conditions, on different dates, and with a few different varieties. And I was able to harvest some really good carrots, and there have also been some significant disappointments. Although the soil conditions of the various gardens likely plays a role in the differences here, and there's no doubt a certain amount of chance involved, I think that the success or failure of an early crop of carrots really comes down to me getting a few key tasks done, and in a timely fashion. Although I'm still uncertain about a few key issues. I try to avoid sowing carrots into freshly dug soil, mainly because I've had issues with the carrot roots forking quite a bit, and I suspect that freshly incorporated organic matter could have been messing with the tiny taproot of the carrot seedlings. I also prefer to prepare a seedbed well in advance, so that the initial flush of weed seeds can be cleared before the delicate carrot seeds are sown. In the no-dig garden, the soil hasn't been dug, and a thick layer of weed-free compost had been added to the surface last year, and that has had a chance to mature. In both of the polytunnels, I've recently shifted to a minimum tillage approach, with compost and fertility added to the surface of the soil that had been dug in previous years. In the beds of the other gardens that have been designated for carrots, I had done any digging or cultivation last autumn so that the soil would have had a chance to settle over the winter. So the only thing that I had to do in the spring was to clear any weeds and to ensure that there was a fine seed bed on the surface of the soil. One of the issues that I've had in the past with growing carrots is getting consistent seed germination. These days, I generally sow a lot more seeds than I need to, as a way of getting around possible germination issues, and I rely on thinning to clear out excessive amounts of seedlings if they do appear. But for the 2 rows of the early carrots that I sowed in the larger polytunnel of the black plot, I tried sowing only 1 seed per station, potentially to avoid the task of thinning. This didn't work out very well, as it seems that the fresh layer of compost wasn't great at retaining moisture, and I didn't water it frequently enough, which resulted in sporadic germination. In most of the other gardens, I covered the beds with sheets of plastic or fleece to help retain moisture and to warm the soil in order to speed up germination in the cool spring weather. This gave some good results, with full germination in the no-dig gardens and in the intensive garden, as well as in the 2 batches of early carrots in the polytunnel garden. But there was problematic germination in the extensive garden, where I suspect I wasn't consistently removing the sheet of plastic during the sunny days and the seedbed possibly overheated. I ended up abandoning the first batch of seeds and sowing again, but still had poor germination even though I had covered the bed with fleece instead, and the seeds of the main crop carrots that I had sowed in the adjacent row had really good germination, and I suspect that slugs might have been eating the seedlings. Weeds crowding out the young, slow-growing carrot plants has also been a big issue in the past, but this season I managed to greatly reduce the competition from faster-growing weed seedlings. Not having freshly tilled beds was a real benefit, which allowed me to kill off any weed seedlings before sowing the carrot seeds. I also used a flame torch to singe the tiny weed seedlings in a few of the gardens before sowing the carrots, without disturbing the soil and bringing a fresh batch of weed seeds up to the surface. With the first batch of early carrots in the polytunnel garden, I also timed a second flaming of the surface of the bed to just before the carrot seedlings emerged, and had very little weeding of the crop after that. The other issue with competition in the past has been from the dense sowing of carrots themselves, especially when I'm a bit too exuberant with the number of seeds that I've sown. And in these cases, timing is really key. This season, the task was done reasonably well, with some batches thinned quite early and a few left a bit late, which could have caused a small amount of competition. But in the polyculture garden, I failed to thin adequately, partially because I find it hard to judge the appropriate density of carrots in these broadcast sown beds, and to figure out how many plants to leave amongst the onions, garlic, and parsnip. The 2 rows of carrots in the black plot polytunnel definitely were affected by the competition from the faster and more aggressive rocket plants that they were planted beside, and this really reduced their growth. Another key issue is preventing pests, and I've had 3 different types of pests damaging my carrot crop in the past. This spring we managed to keep the slug population under control for the most part, but I suspect that they played a role in some of the gaps in the rows of carrot plants in the extensive and in the intensive garden. We have also been mostly successful with avoiding carrot fly getting into the crops, whose larvae can cause quite a bit of damage to the roots. I've found that covering the crop with a fine netting is the best way to prevent this pest, but only if it covers the crop for the full season. And I have to make sure that there are no holes in the mesh, as well as burying the edges of the material with a bit of soil or wood chip. The only batch that I didn't cover was a black plot polytunnel, and I got away with it, I think, mainly because this garden is quite removed from the other growing spaces, and the carrot fly didn't have time to find the crop before it had harvested. I wasn't so fortunate with the first crop in the smaller polytunnel garden, which I left uncovered for too long in the spring, and a few of the roots were damaged. But this damage was minimal compared to what the rats did to the same crop later on. I've had issues with rats eating the exposed part of carrot roots at the surface of the soil, but this one crop suffered the most damage I've ever experienced, with almost every single root damaged or eaten by a rat. Because the carrot fly mesh and the carrot leaves were hiding everything, I didn't notice the damage until I started harvesting, and it was too late. It is only when the crop is harvested that I can confirm that the carrot fly netting has been successful, but also the extent to which the roots are forked, split, or otherwise damaged, as well as the size of the crop. All of this can be a pleasant or a nasty surprise, and it was with the crop from the intensive garden that I was most disappointed. Most of the roots that I pulled out of this garden were forked or split, and many of them were starting to rot, something that I'd only seen before when the carrots had been in the ground for too long in the winter. This batch of carrots were sown earlier and harvested later, so perhaps they had had more time to crack or split as they got larger, or for other damage to be done by soil organisms and for diseases to set in. But the length of time that the roots were in the soil wouldn't have been the only issue, and there were signs that the seeds had been cross-pollinated at some point in the past, as several of them were a completely different color, and perhaps this cross-pollination could have led to an increased tendency of the roots to fork, given the wrong conditions. Perhaps this crop would have done better if I had added additional fertility to the soil, or if I had dug over the soil to loosen it up a bit. But some of the best-shaped roots were from the no-dig garden, with very few roots split or forked from soil that has never been cultivated. This was a big change from last year, where most of the roots in this garden had forked, probably due to the fresh addition of a thick layer of compost to the surface of the soil, and the compost had had a chance to settle in before this season's crop was sown, which did much better. And the second crop of carrots that I grew in the polytunnel garden were really good as well, with very few forked or damaged roots. But both of these gardens were sown with different varieties of carrots than in the other gardens, and I suspect that the variety or seed quality may be an issue. But all of this comes down to how abundant the harvest is, and how usable or marketable the roots are, or at least how much work it would take to process the forked, cracked, or otherwise damaged roots into something that we would want to eat. Measuring yield is an interesting one for these carrots, as in the past I always wanted to wait longer so that the carrots would grow bigger so that I could have a higher yield and more carrots to eat. But I'm beginning to rethink the strategy, as it seems the longer these early varieties of carrots are in the ground, the more likely they will reduce in quality, and I need to work on the timing of the harvests of some of the gardens for next season. Of course, the taste of the carrots is a really important factor, and I did sample a few of the roots from each of the gardens, but because they were available at different times and there was a few different varieties involved, I couldn't really do a proper taste comparison. But I did think that the second crop of carrots from the polytunnel garden were very good, as were the carrots from the no-dig garden. They seemed to have a better flavor than the carrots from the other gardens, but that could also be a bias based on how well they looked. So, in summary, the crop of early carrots from the polyculture garden was not great at all, as they seemed to struggle beside the more established onion and garlic plants that were in the same bed, with possible competition for scarce fertility and soil moisture, and I added to the issue by not thinning them enough. Most of the carrots from the intensive garden were split, forked, or rotting, and I'm not sure if this was an issue with late harvesting, poor variety or seed quality, issues with cultivation or fertility of the soil, or some other factor. The early crop from the larger polytunnel of the black plot was small but good, and would have been better with full germination and less competition. The crop in the extensive garden was much smaller than it could have been, mainly because of germination issues or slug damage, but what was harvested was pretty good quality. I was pleasantly surprised with how well the carrots in the no-dig garden did, especially after the serious issues last season, and the roots were consistently high quality and tasted really good. The earlier batch in the polytunnel garden was a write-off due to the excessive pest damage, but the later crop in the same polytunnel was perhaps the best of the season. They were a fast crop of really well-shaped roots that were very clean and beautiful. The yield was pretty good, with a lot of carrots harvested from this relatively small area, and they tasted really good. I think the well-developed soil condition and fertility balance in this garden was a big reason for this success, as well as maintaining consistent soil moisture throughout the season. We had succeeded in keeping the carrot fly away from this crop, and the rats seemed to be distracted by other crops, and I think that these carrots were harvested at the right stage, where there was a good balance between yield and quality. There was a lot to learn from all of this, and a few remaining questions about some of the failures that I need to work on next season. And there's also a number of different options that I'd be interested in exploring, and a lot of different varieties of early carrots that I could try. But more importantly, I want to work on the timing of successive batches so that I can harvest great quality fresh carrots like these over a much longer part of the season.